So, thank God I remembered to turn on the mic. It's the most annoying thing, my dear friends here listening to the class, is when I give class, sometimes the entire class, it's happened, and then I realized the mic was off. Just imagine that. That's like really annoying. But I guess it's meant to be. So, Baruch Hashem, I think my mic is on. If you don't hear me, let me know, but I think we're good. And let's get right into it, to some Sunday morning Torah and coffee. So, we always like to start with a mitzvah of tzedakah to elicit Hashem's blessing in saying the right words that are inspiring both to myself and to the listeners. So let's start with the mitzvah of tzedakah. No, I'm sorry, I don't have a coffee. So, although the class is called Torah and Coffee, but you're welcome to have a coffee, of course. And please go ahead, drink your coffee, say a bracha, and enjoy. So, I'm giving the class a little bit early based on my schedule today, so please forgive. But the class, of course, will be posted and stay on Facebook and on YouTube, so you could listen whenever you have the time to listen. I was actually very encouraged is the right word. When you give class, you invest time preparing, you invest heart and soul. And when you get feedback from, especially from unexpected sources, it's encouraging. So without saying names, there was a news reporter that I was talking to this past week, somebody who I did not expect. And he says to me, Rabbi Friedman, I do listen, and it's informative. I learn from it, and I do listen to your Sunday morning Torah and Coffee class. And I was really encouraged sort of by that feedback. It's always meaningful to see that the words of Torah that you share are being heard and listened and appreciated, and finding its mark in terms of personal sort of growth, Torah growth, connection to Torah. So thank you for that feedback. So, as I have often said, that the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, says that a person should always learn. Every single thing that you see or hear needs to be taken as a lesson in Avodat Hashem, in the service of the Almighty, the service of Hashem. And in this past week, and it's also connected to the Parsha, there were two events that occurred that it's triggered in my mind a lesson that they both share sort of that same lesson, and it's connected to the Parsha. And this week's the Parsha, the portion of the Torah portion of this past week, the beginning of the portion, in fact, the entire portion deals with Balak and Bilam, or known in English as Balaam, but Bilam, we'll use the proper Hebrew term for names for the term for these people. Balak and Bilam. Balak is the king of Moab, who is on the border of Israel when the Jews are in the desert traveling towards Israel. The Torah tells us, Vayar Balak is how it starts. And Balak saw the Jewish people traveling towards his land, and he was really frightened, and he hires Bilam, the prophet, the non-Jewish prophet, to go ahead. He hires him to curse the Jewish people. The Torah goes on to give us, that's the famous story where the donkey opens up his mouth and speaks to Bilam. He speaks to Bilam. And again, I'm not, as I usually do not go through all the details of the story. For that, you could open up the Bible, the Torah, and you could look and read it by yourself. It's a fascinating sort of dialogue of what goes on both between Balak and Bilam and the messengers and the whole story. In fact, one of the most famous prayers that we say every day in davening, the Ma Tova Alecha Yaakov, how beautiful are your tents, Israel, is from the wanted curses of Bilam, but God, as the Torah tells us later, took those curses that Bilam wanted to curse the Jewish people. Vayahafoch Hashem, God transformed those curses into blessings. So the Parsha, where Balak is frightened by the Jewish people, he hires Bilam to go ahead as being a prophet and having tremendous spiritual negative energy, because that's what he used, this power of prophecy, and he hires him to curse the Jewish people. Hashem, God, clearly says in the Torah that you are only going to say what I will put into your mouth, and instead of the, God forbid, curses, blessings come forth, and we could we could understand and surmise how powerful those and damaging those curses would have been from the power of the blessings, and how so much of that has come to be, and prophecies and so on. There's a lot of very, very beautiful, potent blessings in the prophecy of Bilam, which you can study for hours. But I want to focus on one subject. I have limited time today because of scheduling, so I want to focus on one aspect, and as it relates to the occurrences that was both felt or impacted, and the focus and attention and the concern of society, whether it's throughout the world, the United States, Israel. So there are two specific occurrences that I'm referring to. One is the last week's assassination attempt on the former president. And as I said last week, the focus of this discussion is not political, and that's clear, and I don't even have to say it. I really want to talk about the incident as it is and its lesson. And number two, I want to discuss what happened on Thursday, I believe it was. I think it was Thursday night, where sadly and tragically a unmanned drone with explosives made it through the defense shield, sort of Israel, of the IDF, and hit Tel Aviv, which caused one death, which in itself, one death is an infinite sorrow. But on the other hand, it's always difficult to put this sort of in perspective. And on the other hand, after a drone of that kind of power of explosives, relatively speaking, the minimal amount of death and destruction and more, destruction we don't really care about, but death and injury is a miracle unto itself. Although again, not to forget the tragic loss of life. So there is, I think, a lesson that can be learned from the parsha and these two incidences, which is that in these cases, Balak, the Tehillim, in King David says in Tehillim, "Ma'oivai techakmeini," we got to learn from our adversaries, from our enemies. And here we see a situation, in all these three situations, that there was a threat. In order to sort of eliminate or deal with a threat, protect yourself from a threat, first and foremost, you have to be able to identify the threat. If you cannot identify the threat, then you cannot then protect yourself from the threat. You can't eliminate the threat. Once you identify the threat, you obviously have to take action. It's no good to identify the threat but not take action. So we got to learn from our enemies, meaning Balak, who identified the threat in his mind, the threat were the Jewish people. And there are various reasons why he felt threatened by the Jewish people, which is, it's understandable that he felt threatened. It's interesting that Kabbalah has a very sort of beautiful insight over here, that Balak on a more spiritual level, by Yar Balak, and Balak saw, represents a certain wisdom, a certain element of Chachma, to use the language of Kabbalah or Chassidut. And what did he see? He saw the Jewish people are coming to take away from him the spark of David that came from his descendants, because Ruth was the mother, the grandmother of David. And he was holding sort of that spark of holiness that gave him enough energy to exist. And he feared that the Jews are going to be removing that spark of holiness, which will eventually lead to the birth of David. And as a result, he has no more sort of positive holy energy coming his way, and he will cease to exist. So that's what Kabbalah, who always gives us a more mystical, deeper insight, shares with us. So that's a side note, a little bit Kabbalistic twist over here. But Balak, to his credit, on a negative sense, saw the threat, and not only did he see the threat, he took action. He took action, destructive action, because he hired Bilam, but as King David says, you got to learn from your adversaries. The two incidences of last week. So in terms of the attempted assassination on the former vice president, President Trump, and the Republican nominee, was not a case where the threat was not identified. The threat was identified. In other words, already, as according to all the reports, already quite a while before, the threat was identified by various both security personnel, police officers, or lay people, citizens, but no proper action was taken. Similar to that, or I would say actually conversely, the reports now about the what they call in Hebrew the Katbam, the unmanned aerial drone that was sent to Israel, was actually identified by the security personnel who is in charge. In other words, they saw the flying object on the radar, but for whatever reason, which is an ongoing investigation, they did not deem it a threat and therefore did not take action. And as a result, tragically, the destruction and loss of life occurred. So in both these cases, we see two problems. It's not like we didn't, in one case, we knew the threat, but we didn't take the action necessary to deal with the threat. In one case, we identified that as a problem, but we didn't realize that it's a threat. And I was thinking to myself, again, learning from Bullock in the negative, that this is an amazing and important lesson in life, in educating both ourselves and our children. We live in a time where much of life, sort of salesmanship is all about the packaging. It's about the packaging. If it's packaged nicely, if it's packaged in an appealing way, then then we don't realize that it can be a threat. So, talk about just a simple example of in our diet, right? So today, much of the food is probably one of the most addictive foods that we have today, which is sugar. And everything is, not everything, but much of what we eat is sugar packaged or presented in one way or another, and it has this beautiful packaging, but it's damaging. It's damaging to our body and to our health system, and we know that. Yeah, So I remember reading. I think it was in the Reader's Digest or something, that they did a test. They took exactly the same products. Let's use, for example, cornflakes. I don't know. They took the same products. They put it in a supermarket, and they packaged one in a simple sort of generic type of package, and one product, the same product, they put into this fancy sort of glamorous package. And when they afterwards did a survey of the people who bought both products, right? They didn't tell them that it's the same product. By and large, the people said, oh, this we enjoyed, was far more tasteful, referring to the product which was in a fancier, more appealing packaging. So if it's so, when it comes sort of to material, the same thing, of course, is with social media, and all that is being presented both to ourselves and to our kinderlach, whether it's movies, whether it's media, stories, news. So much is in how it's being presented to us, and therefore, how often do things enter into our brains and into our hearts, and even more so to our kids, who are seeds that are developing, where we do not identify the threat. Not only do we not identify with the threat, often we think it's something wonderful and positive. So I think the lesson on a spiritual service of Hashem and better improvement of mankind, it is here we're being shown that something that this is This is so important. It's so vital to first and foremost identify the threat. And number two, to take action, not just to sort of resolve ourselves or to sort of give up. This is what it is and that's that. No, we have to both identify the threat. We have to be alert because there's constant sort of missiles coming our way. It's just the reality of life. At the same time, we have what it takes to protect ourselves. We have what it takes to protect ourselves, our children, our students, our people we interact with. But we need to be able to identify the threat. And then we must resolve and we must take action. Now, how do you identify the threat? How do you identify the threat? How do you know if something is threatening? I remember talk about in the diet world. So, dieting is a struggle. I know I have struggled throughout my life to make sure, I like food. And I grew up in a home. My mother was Hungarian and there was always good food, good kugel and good goulash and good whatever else is a Hungarian diet and a Russian diet. The good food, Baruch Hashem, there's no shortage of food. And it's always been a struggle. I remember reading a book, I forgot what it's called, and the gist of the book was you have to look at food differently. And they try throughout the book that look at food that's not just something that you're eating in order to satisfy some sort of craving or temptation. But you have to, every time you sit down and look at food as something that is either positive nutritionally or negative. And that's the way you should look at food. Trying to transform your whole approach and what should be your antennas before you're looking at food, and train yourself to look at food that way. That was the sort of the gist of the approach of these psychologists who wrote the book. So in life as well, you have to teach both ourselves and our children to be able to identify the threat. Now, I'm going to come back to what I usually come back. So how do you determine what's a threat? When you have in life today, and you have influences out there who tell us that whatever feels good or feels right, whatever feels good for the child even, this California law, I don't know all the details, that you don't even have to inform parents of something that a child is attracted to that's absolutely harmful to the child. Well, you don't have to let the parents know. So how do you determine in today's world, feel-good world, and total confusion of basic moral, ethical, proper values? So we are so blessed, we're so fortunate, mankind in general, that God gave us a Torah. God would not have created the world. It would not make sense that God would create a world and not give us a book of instructions, of guidelines of what works well. You get a piece of electronics in the mail. You get a car. There's a manual that tells you what you should do and what you shouldn't do, what's good for the engine, what's not good for the engine. God has given us a Torah because otherwise it would be cruel for him to create us and not give us a manual, a guide of how and what is good for us and what's not good for our soul and for our purpose and meaning of our soul as mission in this world. So the Torah is an excellent guide for us to be able to determine what is a threat. If it's in conflict with what the Torah tells us, it's a threat. It's not complicated to identify the threat. When you see something being pushed, you see something being encouraged, you see an incoming missile and so on. Is it a threat? Let me see. Let me open up a code of Jewish law. Let me open up the Chumash. Let me open the Bible. Let me open up a Torah commentary and say, okay, is this a threat? And once I determine it's a threat, I must take action. I must take action for myself and for my children to protect them from the damage, which either can happen immediately or can grab hold and develop and fester and grow into something even more damaging as they grow up. So this is what I thought, just a lesson that can be learned from the occurrences of last week. In addition to, of course, we see the hand of God in all of this, the protection provided both to the former president, the protection provided to those in Tel Aviv. Unfortunately, we would have wanted more complete protection, but these are questions that we don't know the answers to. May God, of course, protect all our citizens, both in this country. May God bring peace and a more respectful dialogue between those who even have fierce opposing opinions. May God give us the blessing that we should be able to identify the threats that are coming our way, and we should also be able to take action. We should have the resolve to take action, and sometimes the best action is what we call preventative action, which is to inculcate ourselves and our children with more positive messaging, with more positive learning, with more positive and holy and meaningful exposure, so their brains are filled with that positivity and holiness, so that they can identify when something is harmful and then have the strength of character to protect themselves from it, and as such not be harmed, and even more importantly, to do good with that which they learned, to make the world, both ourselves and the world around us, a better, more wholesome, more godly place. Have a wonderful week, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share these wonderful words of Torah. Much blessing.